The silence in the dining room felt unnatural, almost arranged. I stepped into the house on Willow Lane, closed the door softly behind me, and knew at once that something had been decided before I arrived. The air was heavy, and that way silence sometimes gets when people are trying to hide it. Maya stood in the kitchen doorway, her back to me, shoulders stiff, moving between the hob and the table as though her task required precise attention. She had already laid 6 place settings. I counted them twice. There were only 4 of us in this house. "Evening, Maya," I said. She did not answer. She adjusted a fork, moved a napkin, and kept her eyes fixed on the table. My son, Tom, was already seated, staring at his plate. He looked up for a moment, offered a weak half-smile, and then looked down again. I hung my coat by the door and took my usual seat. I had lived in this house for 3 years, in the small room on the ground floor beside the corridor. After Evelyn died, I sold our home. Tom insisted I come live with them. "You shouldn't be alone, Dad," he said. I agreed, believing him. I believed that family was a kind of shelter. "Dinner is almost ready," Maya said. The words were for the room, not for me. I folded my hands on the table and waited. The doorbell rang, and Maya's face lit up like she had been waiting for that sound all evening. Her whole manner changed. The cold, precise woman in the kitchen became warm and radiant in an instant. Voices echoed through the hallway, cheerful and loud. "We made it," boomed a man's voice. "Such a lovely home," a woman added, dripping with delight. A moment later, Peter and Nora, Maya's parents, appeared in the doorway, dragging suitcases behind them. I had not known they were coming. "Hope you don't mind us dropping in," Peter said. Maya said it wouldn't be a problem if we stayed a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks. My stomach tightened. "Of course not, Dad," Maya said brightly, kissing her father on the cheek and then her mother. "We're so happy to have you." Nora lowered herself into a chair. That guest room at the Hendersons was dreadful. We told them we'd find other arrangements. I noticed Peter sitting at the head of the table, the seat that had always been Tom's. Tom didn't say a word. "Other arrangements?" I asked quietly. Maya ignored me. She began serving food, smiling as she filled her parents' plates first. Tom's came next, then hers. Mine sat empty. She set the serving bowl down in front of me without meeting my eyes. "Alan, pass the potatoes when you're done," she said. I had not taken any yet. We ate in uneasy silence. Peter filled the space with small talk, stories about his golf club, complained about his neighbors, half jokes that no one found funny, but everyone politely smiled at. Nora added bright comments after each story. Maya laughed in all the right places. Tom kept his head down. I ate mechanically, unable to taste the food. I could feel something coming. Then Maya stood, her chair scraping across the floor. She folded her arms. "Alan, my parents need a proper bedroom," she said, loud enough to make sure everyone heard. "That room on the ground floor will be perfect." I blinked. "That's my room." She didn't flinch. "Either give them your room or pack your things." Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. Peter shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Nora smiled faintly. Tom's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Son," I said softly. Tom looked at me, then looked away. "Maybe we can work something out, Dad." "We already did," Maya said. "They need that room. Mom can't go up and down the stairs. It's settled." "There's a guest room upstairs," I said. "It's got a bathroom just down the hall." Maya slammed her hand on the table. The sound was sharp enough to make the plates rattle. "My parents are not going to shuffle through the hallway at night. They deserve better than that." I looked at Tom again. His face was pale, expression blank. "Maya," I said quietly, "this is where I live." She didn't blink. "This is our house, Alan." Actually, she stopped herself, but I could hear the rest of the sentence in her pause. I stood up. The chair legs scraped against the floor. "I see," I said. "Excuse me." I walked to my room and closed the door gently. The small room looked almost the same as when I'd moved in. My bed was neatly made, my books stacked on the shelf, and Evelyn's photograph on the dresser, the one taken in Devon, her hair caught by the wind. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the quiet. Then I took the suitcase from the wardrobe and set it on the bed. I packed with care. My shirts, trousers, socks, toiletries. Nothing rushed, nothing angry. Through the door, I could hear them laughing. Nora's voice floated down the hall. "This room will be perfect, Peter. So much better than that awful guest room." Something inside me went cold. Not rage. Rage burns hot and fast. This was a quieter thing, like frost spreading over water. I closed the suitcase and sat down on the bed. My mind drifted back to 4 years earlier, to another night in the same dining room. Tom had called me in tears then. The bank was threatening to repossess the house. He was ashamed, desperate. I had driven over, gone through the numbers, and written a check the next morning for £180,000. Family helps family, I told him. Then came the wedding. $15,000 for a venue in Bath that Maya had fallen in love with. $8,000 for her car when the gearbox failed. And then the monthly transfer, £1,200 every month for 3 years. It had become automatic. Routine. They had stopped seeing it as help. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Rows of transactions filled the screen, each one a small reminder. I set the phone down. Through the door, I heard laughter again. "Cream curtains, I think," Nora said. Something cheerful. That was enough. I stood, lifted my suitcase, and walked out. The hallway stretched ahead, familiar but no longer mine. Tom appeared suddenly from the kitchen, his face a mixture of guilt and confusion. "Dad," he said quietly, "maybe you can take the box room upstairs. It's just temporary." "It's all right, son," I said. "I'll take care of myself." I didn't know she was going to. "Yes, you did." He opened his mouth to reply, but Maya's voice called from the kitchen, bright and unconcerned. "Tell him dinner's in the fridge if he wants it." No goodbye. No apology. I stepped outside. The February air was cold and sharp, the kind that made the world feel clean again. I called for a taxi and stood under the porch light, my breath turning to mist. The driver arrived 15 minutes later, a young man with kind eyes. "Evening, mate. Where to?" "The Premier and by Temple Meads," I said. He nodded. "Moving out?" I watched the house recede in the mirror, the warm lights in the windows, the shadows moving inside. Something like that. "Rough day?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "Enlightening," I said. When we reached the hotel, I checked in, took the key card, and went up to the 3rd floor. The room was small, tidy, forgettable. I set my suitcase on the luggage stand and sat on the edge of the bed. In the mirror, I looked almost the same as I had that morning. A 67-year-old man in neat clothes, but I knew something had changed. That night, as I stared at the ceiling, I thought about Maya's words. Either give them your room or pack your things. I had packed my things. And for the first time in years, I was free to decide what came next. Chapter 2. A quiet resolve. I woke to the sound of the city murmuring beneath my window. The Premier and curtains did little to block the morning light, and the soft buzz of passing cars reminded me that the world had not stopped because my life had shifted overnight. I sat up, stared at the neutral walls, and let the silence steady me. There was no sadness, not the kind that collapses a man. It was something quieter, like standing at the edge of a frozen lake, knowing the ice will hold if one treads carefully. I showered, dressed, and went down to the breakfast area. The smell of coffee and toast mingled with the faint hum of morning chatter. Families on holiday, business travelers checking emails, a waitress calling out table numbers. I found a seat by the window and let the ordinariness of it calm me. It was remarkable how quickly a routine could be reclaimed once one stopped waiting for permission. After breakfast, I took my coffee outside and phoned the bank. The woman on the other end spoke with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to numbers rather than emotions. I asked her to cancel the standing transfer to Tom's account. "Would you like me to suspend it temporarily or permanently, Mr. Lewis?" she asked. "Permanently," I replied. There was a pause, the faint clatter of keys. "All right. The regular transfer of £1,200 has been canceled. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "Yes," I said, almost smiling. Could you confirm my balance? When she told me the figure, I thanked her and ended the call. It was not that I cared much for the number itself. It was a sense of control it represented. After years of quiet generosity that had become invisible, I wanted to see where I stood. The next call was to my solicitor, Martin Hayes, an old friend from my teaching days. Martin had handled the paperwork when I sold my house and helped Tom and Maya secure theirs. When his familiar voice came through, it steadied me. "Alan," he said, "good to hear from you. How's retirement treating you?" "It has been better," I said, and told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he exhaled softly. "I can't say I'm surprised, though I am sorry," he said. "You were generous to a fault. Old friend, what would you like to do?" "I'd like to buy a house," I said. "Something close to Willow Lane." Martin chuckled quietly. "Still the teacher who believes in poetic justice?" "Not justice," I replied. Clarity. He promised to call back with options. I left the hotel soon after and walked through the streets of Bristol. The winter air was brisk, the pavements wet from an earlier drizzle. I passed cafes where students sat with laptops and a florist unpacking buckets of tulips. The world, it seemed, moved effortlessly on. I found a small estate agency on the corner of Temple Street. The display window was filled with photographs of houses, most of them too grand for my needs. I stepped inside, and the bell above the door chimed. A young woman behind the desk looked up and smiled. "Good morning. How can I help?" "I'm looking for a 2-bedroom property," I said. "Something within walking distance of Willow Lane, if possible." She nodded, typing quickly. "Do you have a budget in mind?" I told her. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "That's generous," she said. "You'll have options." Within half an hour, we were driving through quiet residential streets. When we turned onto Willow Lane, the sight of my old house made my chest tighten. Not in grief, but in resolve. The agency car slowed outside a modest semi-detached home directly opposite. The "For Sale" sign leaned slightly in the wind. "It's been on the market for a few months," she said. "The owner moved abroad. It's fully furnished, very clean, and the price is negotiable." We walked through the gate, the gravel crunching beneath our feet. The house was neat, with ivy tracing one side of the front wall. Inside, sunlight filled the rooms. 2 bedrooms, a study, and a conservatory that overlooked a tidy garden. From the upstairs window, I could see directly across the street, into the living room of the house I had just left. "I'll take it," I said. The young woman blinked. "Would you like to think about it, or—" "No, I've thought enough lately." She smiled, a little surprised. "I'll have the paperwork ready this afternoon." As she locked up, I stood in the front garden and looked across the street. The curtains of Tom and Maya's living room were open. Maya was standing by the window, phone in hand, laughing at something. Peter sat on the sofa. Nora was rearranging flowers on the table. My son was not in sight. I turned away before she could see me. 2 days later, the sale was finalized. Martin called with the confirmation. "You work faster than most estate agents, Alan," he said, amused. I was motivated. I replied. That evening, I stood by the upstairs window of my new home. The streetlight flickered, casting a pale glow across both houses. From where I stood, I could see the faint silhouettes moving in my old home. Maya's parents settling in, Tom pacing near the door. I felt no anger, only a kind of quiet satisfaction. I had spent years helping them build a life, piece by piece. Now I would build mine, directly across the street, where they could see what they had lost without ever hearing a word from me. The next morning, I unpacked my books and set up my small study by the window. I hung Evelyn's photograph above the desk. Her calm smile seemed to approve. I made a pot of tea, opened my laptop, and began drafting a letter. It was addressed to Tom. Not a plea nor a reprimand, just a statement of fact. "Tom, you and Maya have chosen a path that excludes me, and that is your right. I have removed the financial support I once provided, as I no longer wish to fund a household that does not wish to house me. I have purchased the property opposite yours. Please know that I wish you both well. Dad." I sealed the letter in an envelope. walked across the street, and slipped it through the letterbox. Then I returned to my study, sat by the window, and waited. It took less than an hour. The curtains on their side were pulled open suddenly. Tom stood by the window, the letter in his hand, confusion written across his face. Maya appeared behind him, looked out, and froze. Our eyes met across the narrow street. I lifted my cup of tea in a small, polite gesture. Maya's face drained of color. She turned away, shouting something I could not hear. Tom followed her into the next room. I smiled faintly and turned back to my work. They would soon learn that silence, when chosen, can speak louder than any argument. The first few mornings in the new house passed with surprising ease. I had always believed that comfort came from familiarity, but there was something liberating about starting over, even at my age. Each room had its own stillness. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and lavender, and when sunlight slipped through blinds, it brought with a quiet assurance that I had done the right thing. From a window in my study, I could see directly across to Tom and Maya's house. The view was both strange and oddly satisfying. The curtains that once shielded my life from the street now hid theirs. I did not spend every moment watching, but sometimes when I paused between writing or reading, my eyes drifted across almost involuntarily. I was not spying. I was witnessing distance take shape. On the third morning, I saw Tom step outside with his briefcase. He hesitated on the pavement. Phone pressed his ear, then turned his gaze toward my window. When he spotted me, his expression faltered, somewhere between embarrassment and disbelief. I offered a small nod. He lifted his hand slightly, then looked away and walked quickly to his car. Later that day, I received a call from him. "Dad," he said, voice low and strained. "You bought the house across the street?" "Yes," I said. "It seemed convenient." "Convenient?" He laughed nervously. "You can't be serious. Maya's parents are still here. This is awkward." "I imagine it is," I replied. He exhaled heavily. "Look, about that night, things got out of hand. Maya was upset, and her parents were supposed to stay for a short while. You didn't have to move out." "I didn't move out," I said calmly. "I was told to pack my things, so I did." Silence followed. Then his voice softened. "Maya shouldn't have said it like that. She's just protective of her parents." "Tom," I said, "you don't need to defend her. What's done is done." "Still, this isn't normal," he insisted. "Living across the street like this. People will talk." "Let them," I said. "I've lived a quiet life long enough. I've earned the right to live where I choose." He sighed. "I'll come by later. We need to talk properly." "I'll be here," I said, and ended the call. The afternoon passed in a steady rhythm. I unpacked more boxes, arranged books, and set my old record player. Evelyn had loved music, especially old jazz records. I played one as I worked. Bill Evans' Soft and Melancholy. The sound filled the small space, wrapping the walls with something close to warmth. By the time Tom arrived, the light outside had dimmed. He knocked hesitantly, like a guest unsure if he was welcome. When I opened the door, he looked around the hallway, taking in the space. "You set this up quickly," he said. "Years of teaching taught me how to stay organized," I replied. He smiled faintly, then followed me into the sitting room. I poured tea, the way I always had for him since he was a boy. He sat on the edge of the sofa, shoulders tense. "Maya's not happy," he began. "I gathered that," I said. "She thinks you did this to humiliate her." "Did what exactly?" "Buying this house, moving across the street. She says you're trying to make a point." I leaned back in my chair. "Perhaps I am, but not the one she thinks." He frowned. "Then what is it?" "That I can live independently," I said. "That I don't need to be tolerated in my own family. I spent years helping you build your life, Tom. I wanted you to have stability. Now, I'd like to keep some for myself." He nodded slowly, rubbing his hands together. "You're right, I suppose. I didn't handle things well." "It's not about handling things," I said. "It's about respect and self-respect." He looked up. Mum would have known what to say to calm everyone down. I smiled at that. Yes, she would have. She always did. For a moment, We sat in silence, both lost in different parts of the same memory. Then Tom stood. "I'll talk to Maya again. Maybe we can make things right." "Things are already right," I said. "They're just different now." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but can I ask one favor?" "Depends on the favor." "Don't wave at us from the window. It unsettles her." I laughed quietly. That was never my intention. He smiled weakly, shook my hand, and left. Through the window, I watched him cross the street and enter his house. I could see the faint outlines of movement. Maya pacing, gesturing, her voice sharp even through the glass. Tom stood still, listening, until he turned away. The curtain dropped. I made another cup of tea and returned to my desk. There was something deeply peaceful about solitude when one had chosen it. I spent the evening reading until the light faded completely. Later, as I looked across the street, I noticed something strange. The downstairs lights in their house were off, but the front door was open slightly, just enough for a sliver of hallway light to spill out. A moment later, Peter stepped outside, carrying a rubbish bag. He turned, glanced toward my house, and froze when he saw me watching. Our eyes met. I smiled politely. He frowned, muttered something, and hurried back inside. The door slammed. I could not help but feel that the balance of power had shifted, quietly and irreversibly. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I had not done in years. Some lessons must be taught without words. Pride is a stubborn student. The next morning, I received a letter through my door. It was from Maya. The handwriting was sharp and controlled. "Alan, this arrangement is uncomfortable for all of us. Buying a house across the street was unnecessary and unkind. My parents feel uneasy. Please consider selling and finding a place elsewhere. Maya." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. There was no anger in me, only clarity. She had not expected that I could stand alone. That afternoon, I went to the local bakery, a small shop with a friendly woman behind the counter. As I paid for my loaf, she said, "You must be the new gentleman across from the Lewises. Lovely couple, though I've not seen the older one in a while." I smiled. "He moved," I said, "but not far." She laughed. "Neighborhood gossip will love that." I nodded. "Let them." When I returned home, I brewed another pot of tea and settled by the window again. Across the street, I saw Maya glance out, catch my eye, and quickly pull the curtain shut. I took a slow sip of tea, savoring the moment. Sometimes silence and stillness are louder than shouting. Chapter 4. When Silence Speaks. Morning light drifted to the curtains, soft and golden, casting narrow bands across the floor. I woke earlier than usual that day, not out of restlessness, but because I had grown used to the calm. The air in my new home had its own rhythm now. The quiet on the fridge, the faint tick of the wall clock, and the occasional murmur of pigeons nesting near the gutter. I brewed a pot of tea and carried it to the window. Across the street, Maya's house was alive with motion. Her father, Peter, emerged in a dressing gown to fetch the morning paper, muttering to himself when the wind nearly blew it away. Nora appeared moments later, gesturing animatedly about something he had forgotten. The performance was so familiar that I almost smiled. Then I saw Maya step outside, phone in hand, her expression sharp and determined. She stopped midway down the path and looked directly toward my window. I raised my cup in a calm greeting. Her mouth tightened, and she turned sharply back into the house. The door closed, an audible thud that reached me even across the street. It was becoming a pattern. Every small gesture of civility seemed to unsettle her more than outright confrontation would have. That, I thought, was the quiet advantage of restraint. I spent most of the morning reading through old teaching materials that I had kept from my years at the comprehensive school. It had been nearly 5 years since retirement, but habits die slowly. I still liked to mark margins, correct equations, and sketch diagrams even when there was no pupil to see them. It gave structure to the hours. Around midday, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Nora standing there, wrapped in her heavy wool coat, lips pressed thin. "Good afternoon, Nora," I said pleasantly. "Would you like to come in?" She shook her head. "No, thank you. I only came to say this can't go on. I'm not sure I follow. You sitting here, staring at our house every day, she said, voice rising slightly. It's making Maya anxious. You know she's a sensitive woman. I'm aware, I said evenly, though I assure you I spend very little time thinking about her. She gave a short laugh, though it carried no humor. Then why stay here? Why not move somewhere else? This feels like you're trying to prove a point. Perhaps I am proving that I don't need to be displaced, I said. This is a nice house, close to my son, and close to familiar streets. I see no reason to move. Her expression tightened further. You're hurting them, Alan. I think you'll find, Nora, that what hurts people most is their own reflection. I simply hold up the mirror. She stared at me for a long moment, perhaps hoping I would soften. When I didn't, she turned briskly and marched back across the street. I watched her re-enter the house, waving her arms as she spoke to Maya. From the movement of their shadows through the curtain, I could tell the conversation was heated. Tom arrived home moments later, still in his office clothes, and found himself pulled into whatever storm was brewing. He said little I imagined he had grown accustomed to quiet surrender. Later that evening, I heard the faint sound of their front door slamming again, followed by raised voices that carried to the thin air of the street. It was impossible to catch every word, but one phrase reached me clearly. He's doing it to spite me. I smiled to myself and returned to my armchair, picking up my book once more. The next day brought a letter. This time, it was not from Maya but from Tom. His handwriting was looser, less controlled. Dad, I don't know what to do. Maya says she feels watched, and her parents keep threatening to leave. I tried to explain that you're just living your life, but she won't listen. Could you perhaps draw the blinds during the day, at least when you're near the window? I know you didn't mean for things to get like this. Tom. I read the letter twice. It was not angry, just weary. My son had always been more inclined to appease than to act. I folded the note carefully and set it beside Maya's earlier one in the same drawer. After lunch, I decided to go for a walk. Bristol in winter had its own kind of charm. The smell of damp stone, the low clouds hanging above the rooftops, and the sound of seagulls far from the sea. I walked without direction, letting memory guide me through streets I had once known well. The bookshop near the park was still there, the same owner, though older now. He recognized me immediately. Mr. Lewis, he said, smiling. Still chasing first editions? Only when they stopped running. I replied. We spoke for a while, and I left with 2 books under my arm, one on philosophy and another on home restoration. When I returned home, the street was quiet. No cars, no voices, just the sound of my own footsteps. As I unlocked the door, I noticed something on my porch, a small, handwritten note weighted down by a smooth stone. It was from Peter this time. Alan, please consider the effect your presence is having on our family. Maya is struggling. We all are. Surely, as a father and a teacher, you can understand the value of peace. Peter, I laughed softly. 3 letters in as many days. They were trying to reason with me, but reasoning was never the issue. They still believed they could control my choices the way one disciplines a child. That evening, I wrote a single line in my journal. They cannot see that silence, once mastered, becomes a language of its own. Days passed. The tension across the street grew like ivy, quiet and unstoppable. I saw fewer lights in their windows. Tom left early for work, came home late. Maya's parents looked worn. Even from a distance, their movements had lost the confidence they once carried. Then, one Saturday morning, I heard commotion. Through the window, I saw a removal van parked outside their house. Men were loading suitcases and boxes into the back. Peter and Nora stood nearby, arguing quietly. Maya was inside, pacing the living room. Phone pressed to her ear. After nearly half an hour, the van pulled away, taking her parents with it. The street felt lighter somehow. I sat at my desk, pen in hand, and wrote another note to Tom. Tom, I saw that your in-laws have left. I hope this brings some quiet to your home. If you need anything, I'm across the street. Dad. I walked over and dropped it through the letterbox. That evening, as dusk gathered, there was a gentle knock at my door. When I opened it, Tom stood there. His face was drawn, his eyes tired, but there was something else in them too, something like relief. "They've gone," he said. "I noticed," I replied. "Maya's furious. She blames you." "I imagine she does." He hesitated. "But I don't. I think she needed to see what she'd done." I nodded. Sometimes people only understand consequences when they become visible. He smiled faintly. "You always said teaching was about showing, not telling." "And I was right," I said. "Now, will you come in for a cup of tea?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. That evening, for the first time in months, the house felt like home again. If you enjoyed Chapter 4, don't forget to subscribe, and turn on notifications for Chapter 5 of During Dinner. My daughter-in-law yelled, "The lesson in silence is only just beginning." The kettle began its soft rumble as Tom settled awkwardly at the kitchen table. He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the small details, the framed photographs, the books neatly stacked near the window, the vase of fresh tulips on the counter. He had not been inside since the night I left his house, and I could tell that the memory of that moment lingered in him. "Tea?" I asked. He nodded. "Please." I poured for both of us and sat opposite him. The steam rose between us like a thin curtain, and neither of us spoke for a while. It was not an uncomfortable silence, only careful. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I remembered. "Maya's been staying with a friend for a few days. She said she needed space." "Space," I repeated. "That's usually what people ask for when they mean distance." He gave a faint smile. "I suppose you're right." He took a sip of tea, his eyes still lowered. "Her parents leaving made everything worse. She says you embarrassed her." "I didn't embarrass her," I said. "I reminded her that she cannot control everything. There's a difference." He nodded, though his expression carried more weariness than agreement. "It's been strange these last few days. The house feels empty, quieter, but also lighter. That's the paradox of peace," I said. "It often arrives after noise is left." He looked at me thoughtfully. "You don't regret moving here, do you?" "Not for a moment." Tom leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You know, when you first moved in, I thought you were being petty. I told myself you wanted to prove something. But now I see it differently. You were taking back control." "I simply stopped giving away," I replied. He smiled slightly. "You always make it sound so simple." "It usually is," I said. "It's just that people complicate it when they mistake pride for love." We sat in silence again for a while. Outside, the sound of rain began to patter against the window. Tom glanced toward the street, his eyes lingering on the house opposite. "She called this morning," he said finally. "Said she might come back if things calm down." "I don't know what that means anymore." "It means she expects calm without having to earn it," I said. "But that's her lesson, not yours." He nodded slowly, his thoughts turning inward. "I keep thinking about Mum," he said quietly. "She'd probably tell us both to stop trying to win." I smiled. "Your mother understood that some lessons are taught in silence." I suspect she'd say I'm doing exactly what she would have done. Tom laughed softly, the first genuine sound of ease I'd heard from him in months. "You know, she probably would." We spoke for another hour about small things, work, the city, the old students who still sent me Christmas cards. When he finally stood to leave, he looked lighter, as though he'd set something down he no longer needed to carry. As he opened the door, he turned back. "I think she'll be back soon," he said. Then she'll have to come back to a changed home," I said. "And a changed husband." He smiled. "You sound like you're still teaching." "I never stopped," I said. "The classroom just moved." After he left, the house felt quietly alive again. There was something comforting in the rhythm of solitude followed by brief company, a kind of balance I had not known I missed. Later that evening, I walked to the study and sat by the window. Across the street, the curtains in their house were drawn and no light shone through. The absence of movement made the street feel wider somehow. I wrote another entry in my journal. Forgiveness begins when one stops expecting others to understand. Peace is not an apology. It is a decision. The next morning, I was surprised by another visitor. When I opened the door, Maya stood there. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of pride, defiance, and exhaustion. She wore a neat navy coat, her hair pinned perfectly, but her eyes betrayed the tension she carried. "Alan," she said formally, "we need to talk." I stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated for a moment before crossing the threshold. Her gaze flicked briefly over the hallway, the framed photographs, and the faint scent of tea that still lingered. "You've made yourself comfortable," she said, her tone sharp but restrained. "I have," I said. "It's a pleasant home." She took a seat at the table without being invited. "I came because the situation is becoming ridiculous. Everyone in the neighborhood is talking about it." "I imagine they are," I said. "People do enjoy stories that don't involve them." "This isn't amusing," she said, her voice tightening. "You living across the street is, well, it's inappropriate." "Inappropriate," I repeated, "for a man to live in a house he bought with his own money?" "That's not what I mean," she said, though she avoided my eyes. "You're doing this to spite me." I folded my hands on the table. "No, Maya. I did it because I realized that kindness without boundaries becomes servitude. I was tired of paying to be tolerated." Her mouth opened, then closed again. "You think I don't appreciate what you've done for us?" "I think appreciation without respect is just convenience," I said. "You enjoyed the help until you no longer needed it. The moment I became inconvenient, I was asked to leave." Her cheeks flushed. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I said softly, "and you know it." For a long moment, she said nothing. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence between us. Then she stood abruptly. "You've made your point," she said, "but you've also made my life miserable. If you wanted revenge, congratulations, you got it." "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want peace. Whether you find misery, and that is not my concern." She stared at me for a long time, her lips trembling slightly, and then turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "You used to be a kind man." "I still am," I said. "I've just stopped being your kind of kind." She left without another word. Through the window, I watched her cross the street, shoulders rigid, steps quick and uneven. Tom met her at the door, and though I could not hear their words, their gestures told me everything. He reached for her arm. She pulled away. The door closed behind them. I sat down again, the house settling into its quiet rhythm. Evelyn's photograph caught the last of the afternoon light from a window. I could almost hear her voice, soft, measured, approving. There was no triumph in me, only stillness. Stillness earned, not imposed. I wrote one final note in my journal before evening fell. Stillness is not absence. It is control of presence. The morning after Maya's visit began with an unfamiliar quietness, one that felt heavier than peace. The clouds hung low over Bristol, and the street outside glistened from the rain that had passed in the night. As I brewed my tea, I caught myself replaying our conversation in my mind. Her words had not wounded me, but they lingered like faint echoes, not because of their cruelty, but because of their truth. I had been kind, perhaps to a fault, yet kindness without discernment had cost me dignity. I stood by the window, sipping slowly, and noticed the curtains of their house were still drawn. Usually, Maya was an early riser, but that morning there was no movement at all. The absence of light in that house was a reflection of the state it had become, a space filled with presence but empty of warmth. It was nearly 10 when I heard the knock. This time it was not hesitant, firm, deliberate, and almost impatient. When I opened the door, Tom stood there, his face pale and drawn, rain on his coat and uncertainty in his eyes. "Dad, may I come in?" "Of course." He stepped inside, shaking the water from his sleeves, his shoulders sagging beneath the weight of something unseen. I gestured for him to sit, and he sank heavily into the chair by the kitchen table. "She's left," he said quietly. I said nothing, waiting. "She packed a suitcase this morning. Said she needed time to think. She didn't say where she was going, only that she'd contact me when she was ready." His voice faltered slightly, and I could see that he was trying not to let the words break him. "She'll reach out eventually," I said. I don't know, he replied. This time felt different. Not just anger. Something else. Pride, I said. It's hard to return from pride unless humility leads the way. He looked up at me with tired eyes. You sound so calm about it. How do you do that? I've already lived through worse, I said simply. Losing your mother taught me that peace isn't found in control, but in acceptance. He sighed. I just wanted everyone to get along. Sometimes getting along requires one person to disappear. I said, it was never your job to keep harmony by losing yourself in the process. He nodded, but his gaze drifted toward the window, toward the house across the street. I keep thinking about how it all started, how simple it seemed. We were just trying to help her parents for a few weeks. Then somehow it turned into this. Kindness is often the first casualty when convenience arrives, I said. He rubbed his eyes. You should write that down. You always had a way with lessons. I already did, I said with a faint smile, tapping my notebook on the table. He laughed softly, though it came from somewhere deep in his chest. You really are writing everything down, aren't you? It helps me remember what not to repeat, I said, and what to forgive. We sat in silence for a while. The sound of rain returned, tapping gently against the window. The house felt warm, filled not with conversation but with understanding. Dad, he said finally, I think I'd like to stay here for a few days, just until things settle. You're welcome, I said. The spare room is yours. He hesitated. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude. This house was built for peace, I said. It could use another quiet soul. He smiled faintly, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a shadow of the boy he once was, thoughtful, gentle, unsure of the world but willing to learn. That evening, after we had dinner together, a simple meal of stew and bread, Tom stood at the window, watching the rain ease into mist. I can't believe I asked you to leave that night, he said softly. I've been thinking about it ever since. You were afraid, I said. You want to keep the peace. It was cowardly, he said. It was human, I replied. Cowardice is only permanent when one refuses to face it. He nodded. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, I said, but it's necessary. As he turned from the window, I could see that something had shifted in him. The guilt was still there, but it had softened into resolve. He no longer looked like a man carrying someone else's burdens. When he went to bed, I remained in the study, the lamplight spilling across my desk. I opened my journal again and wrote. Growth often begins in the wreckage of comfort. What they destroy in you can become the foundation of what you build alone. The next few days brought a quiet rhythm. Tom spent his mornings at work, returning in the evenings with takeaway meals, which we ate in comfortable silence. Across the street, the house stayed mostly dark. No sign of Maya, no car in the drive, no movement behind the curtains. By the end of the week, Tom received a message. He read it at the table, then passed me his phone without a word. I need time. Don't wait for me. I handed the phone back to him. You should let her have it, I said. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the message. I think she means it. Then it's time you start meaning something for yourself, I said. He looked up, his expression clearer than it had been in months. You're right. The following weekend, he helped me repair the garden fence. It had been leaning slightly since I moved in, and fixing it gave him something to focus on. We worked in silence, the kind that carried understanding rather than avoidance. When the fence stood straight again, he leaned on the hammer and said, You know, this feels good, doing something real. That's the best kind of healing, I said, the kind that builds instead of blames. He smiled. You sound like you're giving a lecture again. I suppose I am, I said, but this time the lesson's mutual. As the day ended, we sat on the porch with mugs of tea, watching the light fade. Across the street, their house remained still. I could see our reflections faintly in the window. Father and son, both worn, both rebuilding. Dad, he said quietly, do you think she'll ever come back? She might, I said, but if she does, it will be to a different version of you. And that's the point. He nodded. I think I finally understand. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked grass. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to closure, though I knew the story was not finished. There was still a reckoning waiting, not of anger, but of truth. I looked across the street one last time that night and whispered to the quiet, "The lesson has only begun." The following Monday began with a sky washed pale by dawn. Tom had left early for work, and the house settled into its quiet rhythm once again. I spent the morning reading, the pages turning softly beneath my fingers until the sound of a car door closing drew my attention. When I looked out, Maya's car was parked in front of their house. She stood for a long moment before unlocking the door, as if uncertain she wanted to go inside. Then she disappeared behind it, and the street returned to its stillness. I watched for a few minutes more before turning back to my desk. Whatever she had returned for, clothes, papers, maybe a sense of closure, it was no longer my concern. But life has a way of drawing one back into its unfinished chapters. By afternoon, a letter arrived at my door. The handwriting was familiar, controlled, though the pressure of the pen betrayed agitation. "Alan, I realize now that we all behaved poorly. I should not have spoken the way I did that night, and I regret how far things have gone. I am returning home for a few days. Perhaps it would be best if you and Tom spoke privately before I see you both. I have no wish for further conflict. Maya." I read it twice and then set it aside. The apology, though brief, was something. Regret often arrives late, but at least it had arrived. That evening, Tom came home looking unusually composed. He removed his jacket, sat at the table, and said, "She's back." "I saw her car," I said. "She wants to talk," he said quietly. "She says she's sorry." I nodded. "And how do you feel?" He hesitated. "I don't know yet. I thought I'd feel relief, but I mostly feel tired. Like something inside me's already moved on." "That's what acceptance feels like," I said. "It's quieter than forgiveness." He looked at me for a long moment. I used to think peace meant everyone getting along. Now I think it just means not losing yourself to keep others calm. "That's a lesson worth remembering," I said. He smiled faintly. "You've been teaching me that all my life, haven't you?" "I've been reminding you," I said. "The rest was always in you." The next day, Maya came over. She did not knock immediately. She stood on the path for several seconds before finally lifting her hand to the door. Her expression when I opened it was uncertain. The confidence that once colored her voice now tempered by hesitation. "Alan," she said, her tone formal, "may I come in?" I stepped aside. "Of course." She entered the sitting room, looking around as though expecting something different. The air was faintly scented with tea and furniture polish. Evelyn's photograph hung above the fireplace, catching the afternoon light. "You've made this place feel like home," she said softly. "I have," I replied. "It's what homes are for." She clasped her hands together, steadying herself. "I owe you an apology. What I said that night was cruel and unfair. I let my frustration with my parents turn into anger at you. They were supposed to stay only for a short while. Then things got complicated, and I lost sight of how much you had done for us." "I appreciate the apology," I said. "It takes strength to offer one." She nodded, though her eyes glistened. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say it." "Forgiveness doesn't always need to be spoken," I said. "Sometimes it's just a decision not to carry anger anymore." She smiled faintly, though there was sadness in it. "You always did have a way of turning everything into a lesson." "Habit," I said. "Old teachers never retire in spirit." She looked down at her hands. "Tom says you've helped him more these last few weeks than I have in years. He's different, quieter, wiser. He's learning to listen to himself," I said. "That's something every man has to do eventually." She nodded slowly. "I suppose I have some learning to do as well." I said nothing, and she seemed to take the silence as permission to continue. "I thought I was building a family, but really I was trying to build control," she said. "I didn't see it then. Everything had to fit the picture I imagined, the house, my parents, the way things looked. I suppose I treated you like a piece of furniture I could move out of the way." "That's an honest thing to say," I said. She exhaled shakily. I don't want to lose this family, Alan. Not you, not Tom. I just don't know how to start again. You start by being honest, I said. You already have. She nodded, her composure breaking just slightly. Would you? Would you come over for dinner tonight? Just the three of us? I looked at her for a long moment, measuring her tone. It was not a command nor a performance. It was a plea. Yes, I said finally. I'll come. When she left, I sat for a while in quiet reflection. There was a part of me that hesitated, not from bitterness, but from understanding. Reconciliation, if it was to mean anything, had to be earned on both sides. That evening, I crossed the street for the first time since I had left. The front door opened before I could knock, and Tom greeted me with a small, cautious smile. Inside, the house looked much the same, though the atmosphere felt different. The tension that once clung to the air had loosened. Dinner was simple, roast chicken and vegetables, the kind Evelyn used to make. Conversation began awkwardly, then softened with each passing minute. We spoke of small things at first, the garden, the neighbors, the weather, until the weight of what had passed no longer filled every silence. Halfway through the meal, Maya looked up from her plate. I know things can't go back to how they were, she said quietly. But maybe they don't need to. No, I said, they shouldn't. Tom reached for her hand, and she did not pull away. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no grand apology. Only the faint, steady rhythm of three people who had finally stopped pretending that everything was fine. When dinner ended, I stood to leave. Maya walked me to the door. Thank you for coming, she said, and for not hating me. Hate takes energy, I said. I prefer peace. As I stepped outside, the night air was cool and clear. From across the street, my house glowed softly through the window, a quiet beacon of independence earned through hardship. I turned back briefly. Through the window of their house, I saw Tom and Maya clearing the table together. Something small but symbolic. When I reached my study, I sat at the desk and opened my journal once more. Rebuilding is never about returning to what was. It is the quiet art of starting again with what remains. I closed a notebook, feeling the calm settle. The storm had passed, though not forgotten, and that I realized was enough. The following week unfolded with a rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar. After months of tension, the quiet that settled over Willow Lane no longer carried unease. It was a living silence, one that breathed with possibility. The first morning after our dinner, I woke earlier than usual, brewed tea, and opened the curtains to find sunlight spilling across the street. Maya's car was gone. Tom's was in the drive, and for the first time since moving into my new home, I felt a faint sense of balance returning. I spent the morning tending the small garden behind the house. The earth was soft after the night's rain, and the air carried the smell of wet soil and lavender. Gardening had always been Evelyn's hobby, though I had taken up reluctantly after she passed. It had since become a quiet ritual, something that asked for patience rather than perfection. Halfway through pulling weeds from a flower bed, I heard the faint sound of footsteps on the gravel. When I looked up, Tom was standing at the gate, hands in pockets. "You're up early," I said. "I've been thinking," he replied, "about what you said, about rebuilding instead of returning." I straightened and nodded toward the bench by the fence. "Then sit down. Thinking's better done sitting." He smiled faintly and joined me. The sun had begun to warm the garden, and the smell of cut grass drifted in from a nearby house. "I went through Mum's things last night," he said quietly. "Her letters, her old notebooks. I found one she wrote to you. Never sent it." I looked at him, surprised. "What did it say?" He reached into his jacket and handed me a folded piece of paper. The ink was faded but still clear, Evelyn's careful handwriting. "Alan, if you're reading this, I've probably already said most of it in person. But there's one thing I want you to remember if ever you find yourself alone. Don't let love turn into obligation. You have a gift for giving, but not everyone will know how to receive it. When that happens, give space, not anger, and never stop teaching. Even when no one is listening. Someone always is." I read the note twice, tracing the words with my thumb. It was as if she had written it for this exact moment. She always knew I said softly. Tom nodded. She did. I think she'd be proud of you. Of us, maybe. Perhaps, I said, though she'd probably tell me to soften my edges a little. He laughed. She'd probably tell Maya to do the same. We sat for a while, the breeze shifting through the trees, carrying the faint hum of the city in the distance. There was a peace in that moment that neither of us tried to fill with words. After Tom left, I spent the rest of the day sorting through old books in the study. Between the pages of one of Evelyn's gardening journals, I found a photograph. The three of us at the seaside, years ago. Tom barely 17, Evelyn wearing her wide-brimmed hat, both smiling into the wind. I placed it in a frame and set it on the desk beside her other picture. That evening, as the light began to fade, I saw movement across the street. Maya had returned from work. She stood outside the house for a long moment before walking over. Her steps were slow, deliberate, but not hesitant. When I opened the door, she smiled, a real, if cautious, smile. I brought something, she said, holding up a small paper bag. From the bakery you like. Thought it might go with tea. That's very kind, I said, stepping aside to let her in. She followed me to the kitchen, setting the bag on the counter. Inside were 2 freshly baked scones, still warm. I wanted to say thank you, she said, for coming to dinner. It meant a lot to Tom, and to me, though I didn't say it. You just did, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I've been thinking about what you said, about kindness needing boundaries. I never understood that before. I thought kindness meant saying yes. Now I see it's more about knowing when to stop saying yes. It's a lesson most people learn late, I said, but it's worth learning early if possible. She smiled faintly. I've also been thinking about how I treated you. I don't expect you to forget, but I hope one day you'll think of me with less disappointment. I don't feel disappointment anymore, I said, only understanding. Her shoulders eased slightly, the tension softening around her eyes. That's generous of you. It's not generosity, I said. It's clarity. Life's too short to live in the shadow of regret. She nodded, her gaze drifting toward the photograph of Evelyn on the wall. She looks peaceful, she said quietly. She was, I replied, even when things weren't. Maya smiled faintly. I wish I'd known her better. She'd have liked you, I said. Eventually. She laughed softly, the sound light and genuine. That sounds about right. We shared tea and scones at the kitchen table. Conversation flowed more easily than before, not forced, not apologetic, but steady and human. She spoke of her work, of plans to return to teaching part-time, of the way she wanted to simplify her life. I listened, occasionally offering small replies. There was no need for more. When she stood to leave, she paused at the door. I hope we can start again, she said. Not as in-laws forced to tolerate each other, but as people who've learned how to understand one another. I'd like that, I said. As she crossed the street, I watched her glance back once, smiling before disappearing inside. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my journal again. The page waited, blank and patient. Some lessons take years to reach their moment. When they finally do, they arrive not as punishment, but as peace. I closed the book and looked out at the quiet street. For the first time since moving into the house, it felt truly like home. Not a place of retreat, but of return. The streetlights flickered on one by one, and I thought of Evelyn's letter, of Tom's strength, and of Maya's quiet humility. Life had not restored itself. It had evolved, and that, I realized, was better. Sometimes peace is not about endings. It is about learning how to remain still when the noise finally fades. A week passed without disruption. The quiet rhythm of my days began to feel familiar again. I rose early, prepared tea, and sat by the window, watching the sun rise above the roofs of Willow Lane. Tom and Maya had settled into a cautious truce, the kind that grows out of shared effort rather than unspoken agreement. The sight of their car parked side by side again gave me a sense of quiet satisfaction. Not pride, but relief. It was a Tuesday when the balance began to shift once more. I was in the garden trimming the hedge when Tom called across the road. Dad, are you free this evening? I suppose I am, I said. Maya wants to have dinner again. Properly this time. She's cooking. Then I'd better not eat lunch, I said lightly. He smiled, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if things had returned to an older, simpler pattern. Before resentment, before pride, before the fracture that had drawn us all into silence. That evening, when I crossed the street, the air smelled of rosemary and roasted vegetables. The door opened before I could knock, and Maya greeted me with a calm warmth that was new to her. She had always carried herself with control, but that control had softened into something more human now. "I'm glad you came," she said. "So am I replied. Tom poured wine while Maya served the food. It was a modest meal, roast lamb, potatoes, and a simple salad, but every small detail spoke of care. We ate slowly, the conversation moving easily between light memories and quiet reflections. Partway through, Maya set down her fork and looked at me. "Alan," she said carefully, "I've been meaning to tell you something." I waited, patient as always. "I went to see my parents last weekend," she said. "They've been staying in Bath. It was difficult, but I needed to speak to them. I told them about everything, how I behaved, what I said to you, how it all spiraled. And how did they take it? I asked. They were defensive at first," she said. "But then my mother started crying. She said she hadn't realized how much pressure she'd put on me, or on us. My father apologized too. They both said they'd like to visit. Properly this time, but only if you're willing." I paused, setting down my glass. "Visit? Yes," she said. "To apologize. To thank you for what you did for us before all this." I looked at Tom, who nodded faintly. "I told her it's your decision," he said. "They don't want to intrude." I thought for a moment. Forgiveness, I had learned, was not about reopening wounds, but about showing that they had healed. "If they truly wish to come," I said slowly, "then they're welcome." Maya exhaled, visibly relieved. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know how much that means." "Oh, I think I do," I said. Dinner ended with laughter, something that had been absent from that house for far too long. The tension that once filled the air had loosened. It was not gone, but it no longer defined us. When I returned home that night, I wrote in my journal before bed, "Forgiveness is not a door swung open. It is a window quietly unlatched. One must choose whether to climb through." The following weekend, Peter and Nora arrived. Their car pulled up late in the morning, and I watched from my study window as Maya greeted them. There was hesitation in their movements, a kind of careful respect that had not been there before. An hour later, Tom crossed the street to invite me over. "They're here," he said. "Would you come?" I hesitated for a moment, then closed my book and rose. "All right," I said. When I stepped through their door, Nora stood first. Her expression was nervous but sincere. "Alan," she said softly, "I owe you an apology." "There's no debt to collect," I said. "But go on." She clasped her hands together. "We were ungrateful and thoughtless. You gave us a home, and we repaid you with rudeness. I cannot explain it except to say that pride has a way of making fools of people." Peter nodded. "We took advantage of your kindness," he said. "It was wrong, and I've regretted it every day since." I looked at both of them, their faces lined with genuine remorse. "The past has already done its teaching," I said. "All that matters now is what you've learned." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "You're kinder than we deserve." "Perhaps," I said, "but forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing not to carry the weight." Maya placed a hand on her mother's shoulder. Tom watched quietly, relief written across his face. For the first time in many months, the room held peace, not fragile, but earned. We sat together for nearly an hour. Conversation turned from apology to shared memories. The day we moved into the house, the summer evenings in the garden, the meals we once shared without bitterness. It was strange how easily those memories resurfaced once the air had cleared. When I stood to leave, Peter walked me to the door. "You know," he said, "Maya's lucky to have you in her life, even if she didn't realize it soon enough." "I'd say we're all learning how to be lucky," I replied. Back at my own home, I felt the quiet press of contentment, not the loud triumph of victory, but the calm that follows acceptance. The bitterness had dissolved into understanding, and understanding had turned into something gentler. That night, I sat by the window, the streetlight painting long shadows across the desk. From across the street, I could see faint movement, Maya laughing softly, Tom pouring wine, her parents sitting beside them. It was a picture of normality that once seemed impossible. I picked up my pen and wrote one final thought before closing the journal for the night. True forgiveness is not about reconciliation. It is about releasing the need for correction. Sometimes, peace is letting the lesson live on its own. When I looked out again, I noticed something small but meaningful. Maya had turned her head toward my window and waved. This time, I waved back. The distance between us had not vanished. It had transformed. The morning air was crisp and bright, carrying the faint smell of early spring. The rain that had defined the past weeks had given way to sunlight, and the street seemed to hum with a quiet renewal. I stood by my window, tea in hand, looking across the house that had once been a symbol of rejection and now stood as a reminder of endurance. The curtains were open, and I could see movement inside. Maya sat at the table, Tom carrying a tray, both calm and composed. It was an ordinary sight, yet it carried the weight of something extraordinary. Later that day, Tom knocked on my door. He looked content in a way I had not seen in years. Not the forced calm of someone keeping peace, but the genuine ease of a man who had reclaimed it. "We're having a small gathering this evening," he said. "Just the neighbors. Maya's idea. She wants to thank everyone for their patience these past months. She asked me to make sure you come." "I would not miss it," I said. "Good," he replied, smiling. "And bring that bottle of red you're always saving." "I might," I said, pretending to think, "if you finally learn how to pour without spilling." He laughed, shaking his head. "No promises." When evening came, the street glowed with the mellow warmth of late daylight. I crossed the road, carrying the bottle as requested. From their front garden came the sound of quiet conversation and soft music playing from a small speaker. A few neighbors were already there, familiar faces from the lane, each offering polite nods and friendly smiles. Maya stood near the doorway, speaking with Nora, who looked healthier and more relaxed than I remembered. When she saw me, Maya's expression brightened. "Alan, you made it," she said. "I did," I said. "It seems you've managed to turn this place into a real home again." Her smile softened. "With help," she said, "and with time." Tom approached, taking the bottle from me. "See, I knew you'd bring it," he said. "You never waste a good occasion." "Occasions are only good when they're earned," I said. He nodded thoughtfully. "Then I suppose tonight counts." As dusk settled, the small group gathered around the table in the garden. The air was filled with laughter, the scent of roasted food, and the murmur of casual conversation. For the first time in months, Willow Lane felt whole again. When the last of the neighbors left, leaving behind a faint clatter of dishes and soft music, only the family remained, Tom, Maya, her parents, and me. The light from the kitchen spilled through the open window, illuminating the quiet scene like something out of an old memory. Maya looked at me then, her voice soft but steady. "You know," she said, "that night when I said those awful words, I thought I was protecting what I had. I didn't realize I was breaking it. I can't change what I did, but I'm grateful you didn't respond with anger." I looked at her for a long moment. "Anger is easy," I said. "Patience takes work, and I've had plenty of practice." Tom reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "We've both learned from it," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "I think we all have." There was a stillness then, not the uneasy kind that waits for words, but the peaceful kind that comes when everything necessary has been said. The garden lights flickered softly, the evening breeze stirring the leaves above us. Peter leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. "Strange, isn't it?" he said. "We all started out under one roof, and somehow it took two houses to bring us back together." "Sometimes space is the only teacher left," I said. He nodded. "Then perhaps it's taught us all something worth keeping." When the night ended, I lingered for a moment before leaving. As I stepped out into the street, the quiet pressed gently around me. The moon hung low, silvering the rooftops, and the windows of both houses glowed softly. For the first time since everything began, there was no bitterness left in the air, only understanding. Back in my study, I poured the last of the wine into a glass and opened my journal for what I knew would be the final entry. The pen hovered briefly before I began to write. Peace rarely arrives in triumph. It comes quietly, when those who have broken each other finally learn how to mend themselves. Forgiveness is not surrender. It is freedom. And sometimes, freedom means waving across the street, not in pride, but in grace. I set down the pen and looked out through the window. Across the lane, Tom and Maya stood at their doorway, the light behind them warm and steady. They saw me watching, and both lifted their hands in greeting. This time, I waved back not as a gesture of irony, but as acknowledgement of growth, of family, of time's strange kindness. The street was silent except for the soft rustle of leaves and the whisper of the wind. I raised my glass not in celebration, but in gratitude. Evelyn had once told me that home is not a place one keeps, but a peace one earns. Standing there, the light of two houses shining across the narrow road, I finally understood what she meant. Life had come full circle. Thank you for watching to the end of During Dinner, my daughter-in-law yelled. If you found meaning in Alan's story of quiet strength and redemption, please subscribe, and share to help others discover it too. Your support helps bring more heartfelt stories to life.